This story is about two young men who, like many people, were looking for a little adventure. They were looking for something old, something mysterious, and they found it. But what they found wasn't a forgotten treasure or a harmless ghost story. What they found was a terrifying set of instructions written by a completely unhinged individual, detailing a ritual so dark and so specific that reading it alone felt like breaking some sacred ancient seal. This is the story of ***, the creepy ritual they found described in an old journal. Asterisk, asterisk. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, let's talk about abandoned places. The year is 2018, and our main characters are two college students, Alex and Ben, both 20 years old, who lived in upstate New York. They were urban explorers, or urbex enthusiasts, who loved crawling through abandoned hospitals, schools, and factories, documenting the decay with their cameras. Their goal that summer was to find the legendary forgotten home of Silas Reed. Silas Reed was a minor local historical figure, an eccentric, wealthy botanist who was rumored to have gone completely mad and vanished sometime in the 1940s. His sprawling, dilapidated estate was believed to be somewhere deep in the Adirondack foothills, far off the main roads. After weeks of searching historical maps and cross-referencing old land deeds, they found it. The place was magnificent, decaying, and terrifying. It was a massive Victorian-era mansion completely swallowed by the forest. Trees had grown up through the porch, and vines covered the brickwork like skin. The windows were either shattered or boarded up. Alex and Ben entered through a broken cellar door. The air inside was thick, cold, and smelled exactly like dead leaves and mold. They moved slowly, using their flashlights. They found the usual things you find in abandoned homes: rusted furniture, broken crockery, and dust everywhere. They spent maybe 3 hours exploring the lower floors, taking dozens of photos. They eventually found Silas Reed's study. It was a large room lined with bookshelves that were mostly empty. The large oak desk was still there, but everything on it was ruined by water damage, except for one thing: a small, dark wooden box tucked deep inside one of the drawers. The box was heavy and intricately carved with swirling, unsettling designs. Inside, they found a single item: a thick, leather-bound journal. It was protected by a layer of waxed paper, which is why, after 70 or more years, the journal was perfectly preserved. They quickly found out that the journal was Silas Reed's personal log, starting in the year 1935. At first, it was just the rambling thoughts of a lonely, educated man. He wrote about botany, the stars, and his growing frustration with human society. Then, the journal took a dark turn. Starting around the year 1938, Silas began writing about his belief that there were forces, things, that existed just outside of human perception. He wrote about the need to communicate with these things, not for knowledge, but for something he called the unlocking. Alex and Ben were reading this aloud, their voices echoing in the huge, empty house. It was creepy, but they initially treated it like a fun piece of historical horror fiction. They flipped forward, closer to the end of the journal, to the last 20 or so pages. The handwriting had become frantic, huge, and almost illegible. The ink was different, darker, almost black, and it was here that they found it: the ritual. Silas had written down the ritual with extreme, terrifying precision, and he titled it simply ***, the cycle of three. I won't detail the whole thing, but the instructions were horrific and deeply specific. It wasn't about chanting Latin or drawing simple symbols. This was about physical acts performed at specific times, using specific materials. The ritual required the following. First, a precise type of rare toxic mushroom that only blooms in the fall, which Silas had cultivated. Second, a specific complex series of knots tied with human hair taken from the 3 points of the human body: the head, the wrist, and the ankle. Third, a continuous sound, a single, low-frequency hum produced by a specific type of antique brass bowl to be rung for exactly 55 minutes. And the final, most terrifying step, The ritual had to be performed at the very top of the house, in the abandoned observatory, under the light of a new moon facing one of the four cardinal directions. The cardinal direction depended on the year of the performer's birth. Alex and Ben were thoroughly creeped out. They packed the journal and left the mansion. They took the discovery back to their dorm room and started doing research on Silas Reed. They discovered that Silas vanished in the autumn of 1942. He wasn't just missing. His entire house was quarantined by the county sheriff for a short time, though no official reason was ever given. The only local rumor was that he had a horrible accident involving some of his exotic plants. A few days after the discovery, Ben did something Alex thought was completely insane. Ben started collecting the required components. He found the antique brass bowl on an obscure online auction site, purchased for about $700. He found instructions for the toxic mushroom on a specialized botany forum. Alex was horrified. "Are you out of your mind? This is a madman's fantasy. You're treating it like a recipe." Ben, usually the more rational of the two, was unnervingly calm. "It's not fantasy, Alex. It's too specific. It's a mechanism, and I want to see what happens when the mechanism is activated." Ben was born in 1998. According to the journal's instructions, if his birth year was a multiple of 2 and 4, the ritual needed to be performed facing ***west***. The next new moon was less than 2 weeks away, falling on a Friday night. Alex tried everything to dissuade Ben. He threatened to tell the campus police. He threatened to burn the journal. Ben just secured the journal in a locked safe and started preparing the knots. He was cutting his own hair from his head and body, tying the complex braids exactly as described by Silas Reed. On the night of the new moon, Alex finally gave up trying to stop Ben. He knew Ben was going to do it, and he refused to be alone. At 11 o'clock at night, they drove back to the abandoned Silas Reed mansion. They climbed to the rickety observatory at the very top. The room was mostly glass, shattered in many places, making it extremely cold. Ben set up the brass bowl and the knotted hair in the precise configuration described. He ate a small piece of the mushroom just to taste, he said, because the journal warned that eating too much would cause transitory dissolution. At 5 minutes to 12 at night, Ben began ringing the bowl. The hum was deep, a resonant, almost painful tone that vibrated in Alex's chest. Ben sat, facing west, in the middle of the circle of knots, ringing the bowl steadily. Alex stood by the doorway, trembling, filming the entire thing on his phone, just in case. For 50 minutes, nothing happened. The sound was constant, the air was cold. Alex thought, see? It's just junk. It's just noise. Then, at exactly 10 minutes to 1 in the morning, with 5 minutes left in the ritual, the air in the room suddenly went dead cold. Not just cold, but empty. The brass bowl stopped ringing. Ben was still holding the mallet, his hand frozen mid-swing. Alex whispered, "Ben?" Ben didn't respond. He didn't move. Alex walked over and tapped Ben's shoulder. Ben's skin was ice cold, and his body was rigid. He looked down at Ben's face. Ben's eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, and they were completely glazed over, pure white. Alex screamed and grabbed Ben, pulling him up. Ben's body was heavy, like a sack of rocks. As Alex dragged Ben toward the door, he heard it. A single, distinct sound coming from the corner of the room. It was the sound of something large dragging itself across the wooden floor. Alex didn't look. He dragged Ben down the crumbling stairs, across the ruined study, and finally out of the mansion. He threw Ben's inert body into the passenger seat of their car and sped away. He drove Ben straight to the emergency room. The doctors had no explanation for Ben's condition. He wasn't in a coma, his brain activity was normal, but he was completely unresponsive. He was diagnosed as being in a state of catatonic mutism. Alex told the police, a heavily edited version of the story, that they were exploring an old house and Ben had collapsed. The police were suspicious but found no evidence of foul play. The doctors couldn't find a trace of the toxic mushroom in Ben's system. Ben stayed catatonic for 3 weeks. Then, one morning, he simply woke up. He was fine. He remembered everything. He remembered the journal, the ritual, the hum of the bowl, but he refused to talk about the final 5 minutes. He refused to talk about the moment the brass bowl went silent. Alex pressed him. Ben, what did you see? What happened? Ben eventually agreed to tell Alex, but only once, and only after they had completely destroyed the journal and the brass bowl. They burned the journal until it was ash and threw the bowl into the deep river. The next day, Ben explained. He said the humming of the bowl wasn't meant to call something to the room. It was meant to tune his perception. And in the final minute, as the cold descended, he could suddenly see the air itself. The air wasn't empty. It was full of massive, invisible shapes, like colossal black silhouettes pressing in on the observatory glass. And when the sound stopped, he didn't freeze because he was scared. He froze because he looked down at the palm of his own hand. And for a split second, he saw the faint, glowing outline of his own skeleton beneath the skin. He said he didn't see a thing in the corner. He realized that the single dragging sound he heard was the sound of his own body times starting to be pulled apart times at the molecular level by the presence of those enormous silent shadows. The ritual worked. It provided the unlocking. Ben lives a normal life now, but he has one enduring symptom. Every time he is alone and things get perfectly quiet, he hears a faint, low-frequency hum. He knows it's the residual vibration from the ritual. And he knows that every time he hears it, those shadows are just outside of his visible perception, and they are listening. And that, my friends, is why you never, ever, times follow instructions you find in a dead madman's journal. It is a story that is truly strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, let's set the scene. The year is 2007. We are in a quiet, unassuming suburb of Portland, Oregon. The house in question, a two-story colonial with a detached garage, looked perfectly normal from the outside. It was the kind of house you wouldn't look at twice. And that's exactly what made what happened inside so terrifying. The couple who bought it were Mark and Julia Hayes. Mark was a history professor, a pragmatic man who believed in facts and documented evidence. Julia was an artist, creative and open to possibilities, but still grounded. They were in their late 40s and looking for a fresh start. They bought the house, located at 3734 Willow Creek Road, in the month of May, and moved in shortly after. The problems started subtly, almost immediately, and were quickly dismissed as moving stress or forgetfulness. The first incident involved Mark's desk. Mark had a meticulous system for organizing his historical documents. On a Tuesday afternoon, Mark clearly remembered leaving a stack of rare Civil War-era letters worth close to $10,000 neatly piled on the left corner of his large oak desk. He left the study to grab coffee. When he returned only 5 minutes later, the letters were gone. He tore the room apart. Julia helped him. They searched for over 2 hours. Nothing. Mark, annoyed, blamed himself. He figured he must have moved them to a shelf while on the phone, forgetting the entire transaction. 3 days later, the letters reappeared. They weren't tucked away or hidden. They were back on the left corner of the desk, in the exact pile he had left them in originally. Mark was stunned. He hadn't touched the desk since the search. Julia hadn't been in the room. This wasn't just misplacement. This was a momentary, physical relocation of objects. The incidents escalated and began to involve their memory. Julia started forgetting conversations. Mark would mention something, say a dinner reservation they had made for the following Saturday, and Julia would look at him blankly. "Reservation for what, Mark? We agreed we were ordering pizza," she would insist. She would be so firm, so absolutely certain of her memory that Mark would start to doubt his own. Was he the one having the lapse? He was getting older, after all. The reverse also happened. Julia would bring up a detailed memory. "Remember when we decided to paint the kitchen that pale blue?" Mark would have no recollection whatsoever of the decision, the discussion, or the color choice. They would argue, becoming increasingly frustrated and scared by the gap between their realities. One evening, Mark was downstairs watching television. He paused the show and went upstairs to the master bedroom to retrieve his glasses. He walked into the room, grabbed his glasses from the nightstand, and walked back downstairs. He unpaused the television. He watched maybe 30 seconds of the show before he looked down. He wasn't wearing his glasses. He checked his pockets. Not there. He realized he had walked upstairs, gone into the room, seen the glasses, and somehow returned downstairs without them. It was a blank spot, a momentary loss of logic and purpose that only lasted the time it took him to walk down the stairs. But here is where it gets truly unsettling. He didn't realize his mistake until he got back downstairs. It was as if a piece of his consciousness had been momentarily muted. Julia was also experiencing this sense of being muted. One afternoon, she was upstairs painting in her studio. She needed a specific shade of crimson paint. She went downstairs, walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there for a full minute, staring at the milk and eggs. She eventually closed the refrigerator door, walked back upstairs to the studio, and sat down, completely forgetting why she had gone downstairs in the first place. She didn't realize she still needed the crimson paint until 20 minutes later. They started keeping logs. Not just a journal, but a detailed log of every object misplaced, every memory lapse, and every time they had to recheck a room because it felt wrong. They quickly noticed a disturbing pattern. The lapses in memory, the misplaced objects, they almost always occurred when they were moving between rooms, specifically when they were on the stairs or passing through the main hallway. The house itself seemed to be the trigger. The most terrifying moment happened in the month of October, 5 months after they moved in. Julia was in the living room. She glanced down the long main hallway toward the kitchen. She saw Mark standing at the kitchen counter reading a newspaper. She called out to him, "Mark, can you take the dog out in a minute?" Mark didn't move. He just kept reading the paper. Julia called again, louder this time, "Mark." Still no movement. She sighed and started walking down the hallway towards him. As she took maybe 3 steps, she realized something was deeply wrong with the scene. The Mark she was looking at was wearing a blue sweater. Mark had been wearing a gray one all day, and the newspaper he was holding looked like it was folded differently. She stopped moving. She stood motionless in the hallway. Suddenly, she felt a strong hand grab her shoulder. She screamed and spun around. It was Mark. He was standing right behind her, wearing the gray sweater. "What's wrong? Why are you screaming?" he asked, genuinely alarmed. Julia pointed frantically down the hallway. You were just standing there, in the kitchen, reading a paper." Mark walked to the end of the hall. The kitchen was empty. There was no newspaper. Julia was trembling. She hadn't seen a ghost. She had seen a duplicate of her husband a few feet away in a different outfit. But the truly chilling detail was that the real Mark had been directly behind her the entire time, meaning the Mark she saw in the kitchen was standing there while the real Mark was approaching her from the living room. They called a therapist. They feared they were both experiencing shared psychosis. The therapist, a skeptical, no-nonsense woman, listened to their detailed logs and recommended they leave the house immediately. She couldn't explain the missing objects, but she recognized the severe psychological distress. They decided to move out by the end of the year. As they were packing, Mark was wrapping a large mirror in the main hallway. He was securing the bubble wrap with heavy packing tape when he paused. He looked at the reflection of the hallway in the wrapped mirror. Everything looked normal. But then he noticed something that was not normal. There was a section of the hallway wall near the coat closet that was painted a dark, unsettling shade of maroon. In real life, that section of wall was painted the same pale cream as the rest of the house. Mark immediately stopped packing and went to that spot on the wall. He touched it, smooth, painted cream. He backed up, looked at the mirror. The mirror still showed the maroon wall. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it at the spot. Nothing changed. The reality was cream. The reflection was maroon. Then he noticed a tiny, almost invisible seam in the wallpaper where the mirror showed the maroon section. He peeled back the cream wallpaper. Underneath, he found 2 layers of old paint. The bottom layer was a dark, dried blood maroon. He called Julia over. They spent the next hour pulling down all the wallpaper in that section. The maroon paint was there, sure, but what was behind the paint was the ultimate terror. Underneath the maroon paint, Someone, the previous owner, perhaps had written thousands of tiny, repeating phrases. The phrases were written in a jagged, panicked hand, repeating the same lines over and over. Where is the key? It is not Tuesday. I didn't say that. I can't remember. It was a written chronicle of the same exact psychological chaos they had been experiencing. Someone else had lived in that house and been systematically stripped of their sanity and memory, just like Mark and Julia. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by a psychic residue of madness, the building itself feeding on the confusion of its residents. Mark and Julia left the house that day, leaving all their furniture behind. They sold it months later, disclosing everything they knew to the buyers, a large investment firm. They never got any confirmation, but they heard rumors that the house was immediately torn down and the lot paved over. To this day, they still occasionally catch themselves confusing a memory, or looking for an object they know they put down but cannot find. They call these moments the house tingle, a horrifying little reminder that the house may have been destroyed, but the infection it planted in their minds is permanent. And that, my friends, is one of the most terrifying examples of a physical location driving a person, or in this case, a couple, completely and utterly insane. It's a truly strange, dark, and mysterious story. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there. This story is about the dark side of a seemingly miraculous ability. Our main character gained the power to hear the thoughts of everyone around him, tearing down the necessary walls of privacy that keep society functional. He thought he had been given a gift, but he quickly discovered that the human mind is a terrifying place, and listening too closely can unravel your sanity. This is the story of the listener, the man who heard others' thoughts. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now we head to Boston, Massachusetts. The year is 2007. Our main character is Arthur Finch, a mild-mannered 30-year-old accountant. Arthur was, by all accounts, intensely average. He lived a quiet life, went to work, and had a predictable routine. He was unremarkable, and he liked it that way. The change happened on a chilly Saturday afternoon in the month of March. Arthur was volunteering at a local charity event, helping load boxes onto a truck near an old, decommissioned electrical substation, the kind of ugly, fenced-off industrial building that hums constantly. As Arthur lifted a heavy crate, he lost his balance and stumbled backward. He didn't hit the ground, but his shoulder smashed hard against the chain-link fence surrounding the substation. A massive surge of static electricity, a flash of blue light, and a loud, painful crack shot through him. He was thrown forward maybe 3 feet. He lay on the ground, momentarily stunned. He was shaky, but otherwise unharmed. He didn't feel any burns. The only lasting effect was a high-pitched, insistent ringing in his ears. He went home later that evening, still hearing the ringing. He took some pain relievers and went to bed early. The next morning, the ringing was gone. He felt perfectly normal. He went to a busy Sunday brunch spot with his friend David. As they were standing in the crowded line waiting for a table, Arthur suddenly started to hear noise. Not just the normal clamor of the restaurant, but another layer of sound underneath it, a strange, frantic, rushing current of noise that felt like it was inside his head. He heard a woman standing nearby, thinking, "Oh God, I hate this dress. Does David even notice?" Arthur instantly looked at the woman. He hadn't heard her say anything. But the thought was so clear, so loud, that it felt like she had shouted it directly into his ear. He looked at his friend, David, who was talking about football scores, and Arthur heard David's silent thought. "Man, I really hope this idiot doesn't ask me for money again. I'm late on rent." Arthur froze. He stared at David, utterly paralyzed. He was hearing thoughts. Clear, distinct, private thoughts, pouring directly into his consciousness. He spent the next few days in silent, mounting terror. He could hear everything. The office was a nightmare. He could hear 50 different streams of internal dialogue at once. "I need to call the dentist. Did I turn off the oven? I hate Brenda. I wish I was home. I wonder if I can fake a headache." The constant noise was a deafening, overwhelming flood. He couldn't concentrate. He couldn't sleep. The veil of human privacy had been violently torn down, and the reality was crushing. He realized that human beings are not designed to know what other human beings are thinking. The polite, superficial world we construct is only possible because of the silence in our minds. He tried noise-canceling headphones. They worked for external noise, but the thoughts were internal. They bypassed his ears entirely, going straight to the core of his perception. He found he had to isolate himself. He quit his job and moved to a small, remote cabin in the woods of Maine. He bought a massive plot of land so his nearest neighbor would be more than 2 miles away. In the complete silence of the woods, he finally found peace. The thoughts stopped. He was alone with the sound of his own thoughts, which were refreshingly dull and normal. But Arthur quickly became profoundly lonely. He missed human interaction. He decided he needed to control the power, not flee from it. He started performing small experiments to see if he could tune the telepathy. He would drive to the edge of his property and listen for the thoughts of a passing motorist. He found that the thoughts would only come in clearly if the person was within maybe a 100-foot radius. It was a proximity-based telepathy. He started going into small towns, testing his ability. He learned things about people's deep, dark secrets, petty cruelties, hidden desires. He found out the local mayor was embezzling funds, he learned about a woman planning an affair, and he learned about a teenager considering running away from home. The power was immense, but the constant flood of negative, chaotic internal noise was taxing his sanity. He eventually found a way to filter it. He discovered that if he focused intensely on a single individual, the surrounding mental noise would fade, and he could hear that person's thoughts with crystal clarity. It took immense mental effort, but it was possible. He became a targeted listener. One evening, he was sitting in a coffee shop, testing his focused listening. He chose a man across the room, a successful-looking businessman in his early 50s. Arthur focused his mental energy entirely on him. Arthur immediately heard the man's thought. I have 3 hours before my flight. I hope the traffic isn't bad. Normal. Mundane. Arthur maintained the focus. The man suddenly thought, I should have killed her years ago. It would have been cleaner. Arthur flinched. He stared at the businessman. The man was calmly scrolling on his phone, sipping his latte, completely placid on the outside, but inside he was a cold-blooded monster. Arthur could hear the detailed, chilling thought stream of a person who had committed murder and was meticulously planning his escape. Arthur was horrified. He called the police immediately, telling them everything. He knew it sounded insane, but he gave them the man's name, his flight number, and the location of the body, which the man had mentally pictured. The police arrested the businessman at the airport gate. They found the body exactly where Arthur said it would be. Arthur had become an involuntary detective. He was hailed as an anonymous hero. The police protected his identity, accepting his story as a tip. But the businessman, once arrested, knew he hadn't left any clues. He demanded to know how the police found him. The police simply said, "We have our sources." But the businessman, being highly intelligent, started to investigate. He realized the only person who could have known was the average-looking man sitting silently in the coffee shop, the man who was staring intently at him for 5 minutes straight. The businessman, even from jail, had resources. He hired a team of private investigators to find Arthur. The investigators were methodical, tracking down the remote cabin in Maine. A few months after the arrest, Arthur was back in his isolated cabin. He was sitting peacefully on his porch, reading, enjoying the silence. Suddenly, the silence shattered. He heard a thought. It wasn't loud, but it was focused and clear, coming from the edge of his property line. He's on the porch. The shotgun is the easiest way. Arthur dropped his book, leaped up, and dove into the cabin, just as the window shattered. A shotgun blast tore through the wall where his head had been seconds before. Arthur crawled frantically across the floor, adrenaline surging. He grabbed his hunting rifle. The thought, now closer, was frantic. He knew I was here. How did he know? I didn't make a sound. Arthur realized the horrible, impossible truth. The private investigator was thinking, loudly and clearly. Arthur knew every step the man was taking, every thought he was planning. Arthur became the perfect defensive target. He could predict the ambush, the flank, the line of fire. He used his rifle and fired 3 precise shots, not at the investigator, but at the tree just above his head. forcing the man to retreat. The investigator fled. Arthur was safe, for now. But the confrontation changed everything. Arthur had been driven to the edge of his sanity by the thoughts of strangers, and now he had used that same terrifying mental insight to potentially kill another human being. The telepathy, once a source of terror, had now become a necessary protective weapon. Arthur still lives in that remote cabin in Maine. He never leaves. He has set up sophisticated microphones and motion sensors around his property, but the only true alarm system he trusts is the silence. He lives in perpetual fear, constantly scanning the edges of his property with his mind, listening for the faintest, intrusive internal voice. He knows that he has become the target of the dark secrets he exposed, and the only way to survive is to constantly listen to the chaos he once tried so hard to escape. And that, my friends, is why we must be grateful for the silence in our minds. Because without it, the truth of the world is a relentless, terrifying noise. It is a story that is truly strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there.
Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we venture deep into the heart of a vast, unmapped wilderness, a place where ancient forests whisper secrets and the very ground beneath your feet hides unspeakable truths. This is a terrifying tale of a seasoned wilderness guide who took a group of novice hikers into a supposedly pristine national park, only to discover that the forest itself was a conscious, malevolent entity, slowly claiming the land and everyone within it. This is the story of the national park where the trees were also the traps. Our protagonist is David Miller, a man in his late 40s, a highly respected wilderness guide with 25 years of experience. His current assignment was a routine 5-day, 4-night trek through the remote sections of the Blackwood National Park, guiding a group of 4 inexperienced hikers. Sarah, a photographer, Mark, an amateur survivalist, Emily, a quiet nature lover, and Ben, a college student, glued to his phone. The first 2 days were idyllic. They hiked through towering forests and set up camp under a canopy of stars. The air was crisp, the wildlife abundant. The unsettling feeling began on the morning of the 3rd day. They were following a well-established trail, one David had walked dozens of times. Yet, as they emerged from a particularly dense grove of ancient pines, the trail seemed to vanish. The familiar landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a fallen giant oak, were simply gone. The entire landscape felt subtly different. The trees seemed denser, closer, and the ground underfoot felt softer, almost spongy. The air now carried a faint, sweet, cloying scent, like decaying wildflowers mixed with something metallic. David attempted to backtrack, but the path they had just taken seemed to have twisted and warped, making it impossible to see their original entry point. It was as if the forest was actively trying to confuse them. That night, around the campfire, the group grew uneasy. Emily complained of a persistent, low-frequency hum that she felt in her teeth, a sound no one else seemed to hear. Ben, whose phone had lost all signal, showed David his compass, which was spinning wildly. The sun, Ben pointed out, had set in the wrong place. David checked his own compass, confirming the erratic movement. He dismissed it as a magnetic anomaly, but a primal dread began to coil in his gut. They woke on the 4th day to a chilling discovery. Sarah's camera, which she had meticulously placed in her zipped-up tent, was gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just an inexplicable absence. David examined the perimeter. The trees had moved overnight. A massive, gnarled ancient oak, which had been 100 feet away, was now standing directly at the edge of their fire pit, its colossal roots snaking across the ground like thick, dark veins. Its bark was a deep, almost black hue. Emily suddenly screamed, pointing at the oak. A small metallic object was protruding from a crevice in the bark, the lens cap of Sarah's camera. The tree had somehow absorbed her camera. David felt a cold horror. This was not a normal forest. This forest was alive, aware, and capable of things that defied natural law. The trees weren't just trees. They were an active, predatory ecosystem. "We need to get out of here. Now," David commanded. "Forget the trail. We cut straight east to the ranger station." They started hacking their way through the dense undergrowth, but the forest seemed to resist them. Branches twisted and snaked, blocking their path. Roots rose from the ground like tripwires. The air grew thicker, the cloying scent more intense, and the low hum that Emily had heard was now faintly audible to David and Ben, a vibrating pressure that seemed to emanate from the very ground. Then they realized the most terrifying detail. The trees were rearranging themselves. A massive, freshly fallen redwood crashed down behind them, cutting off their retreat. Smaller pines rapidly grew in front of them, weaving their branches together to form an impenetrable wall. They were being herded. Mark, in a panicked attempt to gain a vantage point, scaled a huge tree. A minute later, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest, followed by a sickening crack. Slowly, the giant oak tree they had camped beside began to change. Its black bark seemed to deepen, becoming slick and glistening. A new, grotesque branch began to slowly extrude from its trunk, twisting and thickening into a perfect, sickening mimicry of a human arm. Hanging limp and lifeless from the end of the new branch was Mark's emergency whistle. The tree had integrated him. Ben, seeing this, broke down, pointing frantically at the ground. "They're watching us. The roots are moving. They're like veins." David looked down. The spongy ground was indeed subtly pulsing. David grabbed Emily, pulling her back. "We run northeast!" They ran, but the hum intensified with every step. Then a new sound cut through the hum, a distant, mournful cry, the voice of Sarah, faint and distorted, seeming to emanate from the very air and the rustling leaves. The trees were taunting them with the voices of their absorbed victims. Emily, disoriented, stumbled over a root that seemed to spring up in her path. She fell, hitting her head on a stone. David rushed to her, but her eyes were open, staring blankly. The hum intensified around her. The forest had claimed another. David stood alone, the last survivor, surrounded by the towering, conscious forest. The trees were still moving, encircling him. The ground pulsed rhythmically, and the whispers of Sarah and Mark danced on the breeze. The hum was deafening in his skull. He looked at his hand. A thin, dark, fibrous tendril was slowly beginning to snake out from beneath his fingernail, a tiny, almost imperceptible root beginning to grow from his own flesh. The absorption had already begun. David fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, but from a profound understanding. The Blackwood National Park was not just a place. It was a single, colossal organism, an ancient, intelligent life form that had evolved to mimic a forest, slowly expanding its territory, integrating every living thing that dared to enter. The trees were its limbs, the hum its consciousness, and the silence it sought was the absence of anything that was not it. His vision blurred. The rustling of the leaves above him resolved into a single, vast, guttural whisper, a whisper that formed a single, horrifying sentence. "Welcome home, little seed." David Miller was never found. Search parties found nothing but an unusually dense, quiet section of the Blackwood National Park. The ranger station's official report noted the peculiar, unsettling silence and the fact that all compasses malfunctioned nearby. 3 months later, a new sapling, a young pine, was observed growing at an impossible rate directly on the old, now completely overgrown campsite. It was taller, darker, and seemed to hum faintly in the wind. The terrifying implication is that the national park is a vast, ancient, biological intelligence that continuously expands, integrating all life into its immense collective consciousness. And it's still out there, silently waiting for the next group of hikers to become new components of its endless, horrifying growth. So, what do you think the Blackwood National Park truly is? And what will it look like when it finally reaches the city limits? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And tell me, where in the world are you watching this story from? Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
This story is about the chilling, relentless sensation that you are being watched not by a single stalker, but by a phenomenon. Our main character started to notice a face, the same face appearing in every photograph, every crowd, every fleeting glimpse of human life. This wasn't just coincidence. It was a terrifying, systematic intrusion that made him question if his entire world was a carefully crafted stage set just for him. This is the story of he kept seeing the same woman in every crowd. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, let's travel to Chicago, Illinois. The year is 2014. We meet a man named David Chen. David was 32 years old, working as a data analyst. He was organized, logical, and deeply skeptical of anything that couldn't be quantified or proven with a spreadsheet. The incident that started everything was small, insignificant, and completely ignorable. David was scrolling through his phone, looking at photos from a major city marathon he had attended the previous Sunday. He wasn't running, he was just a spectator. He stopped on a wide-angle shot he had taken of the starting line, trying to capture the energy of the crowd. He zoomed in, just enjoying the chaos, when his eye caught a single face in the dense pack of runners, maybe a third of the way back from the front. It was a woman. She had distinct features: long, straight black hair, a narrow face, and a pair of large, square, red-framed glasses. It was a memorable face. David paused because the woman was wearing a highly distinctive bright yellow running shirt with a peculiar hand-drawn black symbol on the front, a jagged circle with a single line through it. David remembered seeing that symbol. He saved the photo and went on with his day. 2 days later, David was walking through the crowded downtown train station on his way to work. He was listening to music, lost in thought. As he passed a newsstand, he glanced at a large, brightly colored advertisement for a local theater production. It featured a dozen actors posing together, and there she was. Tucked into the background, fourth from the left, wearing a period costume but otherwise unmistakable. The woman with the long black hair and the distinct, narrow face. She wasn't wearing the red glasses, but the face was identical. David stopped. He stared at the poster for maybe 15 seconds. Then he shook his head. It's Chicago, he thought. There are millions of people here. It's an actor. Maybe she just looks similar to the runner. He took a quick, discreet photo of the poster and walked on. Over the next few weeks, the sightings escalated from coincidence to impossible. David started seeing her in places she couldn't possibly be. He was watching an old documentary on television about the 1950s Korean War, and in a fleeting crowd shot of American soldiers loading onto a troop ship, there she was, the narrow face, the black hair, dressed in a Red Cross nurse's uniform. He saw her face, or a face identical to hers, in a photograph in a college history textbook, identified as a suffragette from the 1890s. He found her in the background of a tourism brochure for a beach in Thailand. The woman was physically identical in every sighting, though her clothing and context changed wildly across time and geography. David wasn't seeing a look-alike. He was seeing the exact same woman consistently. He decided to document everything. Being a data analyst, he created a massive file he titled The Constant. He collected every image, noting the date, location, and context. He even found her in 3 different stock photos used by the company he worked for. He showed his findings to his friend, Michael. Michael, seeing the dozens of photos, laughed. "Dude, this is awesome," Michael said. "It's called pareidolia. Your brain has fixed on a particular facial template, and now you're seeing that template everywhere. It's just confirmation bias, mixed with an average-looking face." To prove his point, Michael printed out 5 random stock photos of crowds, instructing David to find the woman in them. David searched carefully and found nothing. "See," Michael said, "your brain just sometimes gets a little obsessive." David felt relieved. He knew Michael was right. It was a statistical anomaly created by his own mind. He decided to stop looking. He felt fine for maybe 2 weeks. He went back to his life, focusing on his work. Then came the elevator incident. David was alone, waiting for the elevator in his large, modern office building. The walls of the elevator banks were covered in shiny, polished stainless steel. He pressed the button and stood, staring blankly at his own distorted reflection in the steel panel while he waited for the chime. The elevator arrived. The doors slid open. David took a step forward to enter the car, when he happened to glance at his reflection in the steel one last time. And this time, the reflection was not his. Standing in the steel panel, right behind him, was the woman. The long black hair, the narrow face, the large red-framed glasses. She was standing exactly where he knew the empty hallway to be. And the reflection of her face was completely devoid of expression, blank, cold, and utterly terrifying. David spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The hallway was empty. He was completely alone. He looked back at the stainless steel. His own normal reflection was staring back at him. This was no longer pareidolia. This was a physical intrusion into his reality. The mirror-like surface had momentarily shown him the truth. The woman was always consistently behind him, just out of sight. David quit his job the next day. He liquidated his assets, sold his condo, and moved to a remote, tiny cabin in rural Montana, an area with a population of maybe 200 people. He cut off almost all contact with the outside world. He felt safe for a few months. He was completely isolated. He never went into town, ordering his supplies online to be dropped off at the end of his long dirt road. No crowds, no photos, no stainless steel. Then, one snowy afternoon, he decided to clean out the cabin's old basement, which hadn't been touched in decades. It was musty, filled with old mining equipment and boxes of junk. He moved an ancient, crumbling pile of newspapers. The top newspaper was from the year 1982, the local Montana paper, and the headline was about a major town council meeting. David used the paper to wipe the dust off his hands before tossing it. But just before he threw the paper into the trash barrel, he caught a glimpse of the photo accompanying the article, a wide-angle shot of the town hall, full of citizens attending the meeting. David dropped the paper. His heart seized up. Tucked away in the far corner of the photo, standing calmly by the exit door, was the woman. The black hair, the narrow face. But this time, she wasn't wearing an outfit from a different time or place. She was wearing a thick black down jacket, the exact same heavy coat that David himself had been wearing since he moved to the cabin. David stared at the photo, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a historical anomaly. This was now. The woman wasn't just appearing in random crowds, she was appearing in the crowds David currently frequented, or in the places he currently inhabited across time. He looked around the empty, cold basement. If she was in the 1982 photo wearing his jacket, then she was a constant observer, tracking him through time and space, mocking him by wearing his own clothes. He knew she wasn't an ordinary human being. She was a fixture of his reality, an observer who had always been there, always waiting, always watching. And she was getting closer. He abandoned the cabin immediately, driving away without packing anything. He is currently living nomadically, never staying in one place for more than a few days, and critically, he avoids all forms of media, all photographs, all reflective surfaces, and above all, crowds. Because David knows with absolute certainty that the moment he relaxes, the moment he looks into a crowded scene or a mirror, she will be there. And the last thing he will ever see is her cold, blank, narrow face, wearing his clothes, waiting for him to finally catch up to the reality she is creating. And that, my friends, is why some people say that there are things in this world that are not alive or dead, but simply present, following you through time. It is a story that is truly strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, to stay safe out there.